Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about how the dismissive avoidant attachment style individual tends to face burnout. And we're going to talk about how this happens, why this happens, how this impacts like the shrinking of the emotional bandwidth of the DA, and then what you can actually do about it in a situation. So, first and foremost, dismissive avoidants tend to have what we could call a sort of smaller emotional bandwidth than the other three attachment styles, being secure, FA, and AP. And so basically, this is the result of being in emotional repression in the relationship to oneself. So often, what's taking place is there's this lack of like working through things in a relationship. So let's say somebody feels triggered, as opposed to addressing what's creating that trigger, correcting one's thoughts about the situation or literally approaching the situation to communicate a boundary or state a need or work it through. Instead, the dismissive avoidant is completely and consistently emotionally repressing their feelings. Now, this is because the dismissive avoidant attachment style individual actually prioritizes avoiding conflict and staying safe over feeling emotionally regulated, connected, seen, and heard. And also because the dismissive avoidant doesn't tend to prioritize getting their needs met from other people. So it's much easier for the dismissive avoidant, according to these subconscious coping mechanisms and little patterns that have developed as a result in the dismissive avoidant subconscious mind. It's much easier for them to just sort of shut down and turn their emotions off. But what this leads to is also having a repressed relationship emotionally with oneself. And what that translates to is that bucket of emotional availability being used up very quickly because it's sort of starting at like a depleted state. So if you imagine that like the average person has a bucket full of emotional energy to give to other people, the dismissive avoidance may only be 25% full to begin with. And keep in mind, these are subconscious coping mechanisms and patterns. These things can absolutely be resolved over time, especially when a dismissive avoidant learns to actually process their feelings, acknowledge their feelings, feel their feelings, and then comes to realize, oh, feelings are just guiding mechanisms. They're not the end result. They're not there to hurt me or punish me or scare me or make me feel bad for no reason. Feelings are guiding me to let me know when I have an unmet need that needs to be actioned, or feelings are guiding me to let me know when I'm in a position where I may be perceiving things in a way that's telling a painful story about myself because of that situation. So, for example, a good DA example of this would be a dismissive avoidant making a mistake in a work meeting. And then, as opposed to being like, oh, let me fix the mistake going into next time, instead, the DA might say, oh, I'm defective. I'm shameful. I can't believe I did that. Everybody thinks I'm embarrassing. And they might be like really shaming themselves. And so those emotions are an automatic feedback mechanism there to support us all the time in quite a perfect way. And when we realize that and we can say, okay, my feelings are this information that's making the subconscious content conscious. So I can realize that I have an unmet need or realize I'm telling a painful story and solve for that, then the painful feelings start to go away. So it's a really important thing to really recognize in here. So, what does this mean when it comes to burnout? So, if we have a dismissive avoidant who's already got this like shrunken emotional bandwidth throughout the day, and then they get into a position where something goes wrong, well, their coping mechanism is to further essentially shrink their emotional bandwidth, repress their own feelings, repress their own needs. It's a strategy to stay safe and avoid conflict. And it becomes this like avoidance oriented survival mechanism that kicks into play. So, what this translates to is dismissive avoidance often being trapped in this sort of vicious cycle of feeling a lack of emotional resolution about things, which then leads them to basically feel suboptimal about things in general in their life, which then further leads them to feel like, okay, well, I don't have a lot of emotional connection to be able to give. So let me just stay at a surface level, which then further leads them to have some of their basic human needs, like our needs for connection, attachment, closeness, vulnerability, to be seen, to be recognized, to be understood. It leads to those things being a little bit robbed, and then they stay in this sort of vicious cycle where it's like when our needs are not met, we feel emotionally depleted. And then when their needs are not met, they don't like the way of of feeling emotionally depleted. They don't like to feel those feelings. So they repress, which leads to further needs being unmet, which leads to further emotional depletion, which just sort of goes and loops around and around and around. And if that's combined with painful storytelling, like going, oh, I'm shameful, I'm not good enough, I'm defective, something's wrong with me, having these sort of narratives that they may assign to mistakes that they make in their life, they often want to keep themselves still sort of pulled back and pulled away. So what's really interesting here is that part of healing burnout, when we look at like when people are actually struggling with burnout, they're usually not struggling per se with just the amount of time they have in their life. I think we have this sort of like collective idea that says, oh, if somebody's struggling with burnout issues, they're struggling with not having enough time. But time is neutral, right? Because if I said, okay, you have 10 days in a week instead of 7 days in a week, but in those extra 3 days per week, you have to sit down and stare at the wall in the dark, and you can't meditate and you can't, think about anything that you want to, you just have to stare at the wall in the dark. You'd probably be like, I don't really care to have those extra 3 days. So it's not, see that time is neutral. Like it's what we subconsciously believe we can use time for, which is actually, when we dig into it, all about our needs. So when we look at burnout, it's actually not so much that we have so much on our plate per se. It's that we have not enough on our plate of the things that we need to truly recharge us. In some cases, there can be an actual like nervous system response, like we need more time to just rest and have comfort and peace and nothing to do. But a lot of the time, burnout happens because we're not getting our personality needs and our subconscious mind's needs properly and effectively replenished. And because there's the absence of that, we don't feel good and we feel more tired. We have more resistance. We procrastinate more. Tasks that we're trying to do that we don't like feel like they weigh more heavily on us. And so burnout has just as much, if not more, to do with, what are we doing? What is there a lack of what we really need to be doing that recharges us personally? That we're not getting to fill up our needs buckets around. And so with dismissive avoidance specifically, how this tends to relate is they have because they're sort of caught in this like emotional repression and then combined with unmet needs, this shrunken emotional bandwidth leads them to not really know how to solve for their needs completely effectively. So they often end up solving for their needs through things like creature comforts, which, yes, may make them feel like a short-term gratification of feeling better, but aren't necessarily actually habits or patterns that are effectively recharging them. And I want you to think of the difference here between, let's say you watched, some kind of like movie that wasn't that good, that wasn't that important to you. You just kind of turned on, or you watch like a rerun of a television show, for example. That's not giving you energy back. But if you have a really, deep, powerful, meaningful conversation with somebody in your life, if you, have a great workout and you're out in nature, or if you do a long meditation or breath work, or you're doing something where you're being with your body, those are things that are replenishing your needs and basically giving you energy back. They're actually recharging you. And so what often takes place is DAs have this like shrunken emotional bandwidth, get locked in this vicious cycle of not being able to solve for that and uproot the root of those problems and be able to get their needs met. And then it's combined with the strategies they use to get their needs met are often things that are quite ineffective at actually replenishing and re-energizing. So dismissive avoidance can almost be in this sort of chronic silent state of burnout, which is another factor that leads them to keep sort of pushing people away as a strategy to try. They're just trying to regulate and equilibrate, but it takes much longer to equilibrate through, let's say, 10 TV show reruns, as opposed to, doing an hour-long meditation, an hour walk out in nature, and half an hour of intense exercise. Like, you're going to feel completely different in one set of things versus the other. So I thought that was an important thing to touch on. We will do a little series around this, talking about some of the patterns that lead FAs to burnout, APs to burnout. So stay tuned for that. If you want to do a deeper dive into some of this stuff and actually correct some of these core patterns, the Discover, Embrace, and Fulfill Your Personal Needs course and the Advanced Core Needs course are all about like this stuff, understanding your own patterns, your own needs, how to show up for them, how to strategize and plan on behalf of them, and how to feel re-energized in your life and very purposeful because you have a clear understanding of who you are at the subconscious level. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.